All right, folks. So I think what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to mute everybody but me, just so that we don't get background noise here. Hopefully you can all still hear me. And I'll just kick this off a little bit. This is just our second office hours thing. We're trying to do this monthly, and um, I like it to be a very informal thing. So really, it's meant to answer questions and to help people out as much as possible. We have a lot of WordPress customers, and a lot of them have questions. And I thought at one point, since we're doing this WordPress maintenance and support, it might be helpful if once a month or more, we're able to do a little webinar where people can just join and say, "Hey, Eric, I've been meaning to ask you about site speed," or something like that, and sort of just pick our brain, almost like a little meetup online, so to speak, but really focused on a different aspect of using WordPress or optimizing WordPress or web stuff in general. So last month we talked a lot about Cloudflare and also about Sakuri and using that on your site. I guess I'm not showing my screen here, but if you go to IvyCat's site in our blog, whoops, type in, here we go. In our blog, we've got, let's see, using Cloudflare and Sakuri with WordPress. It's this post here, and there's actually a video of our last office hours there, where we had a whopping one person who had signed in outside of me and Jenny. But it was fun. We talked about, basically trying to speed up your site with Cloudflare, and then also how to add some extra security with Sakuri. So anyway, today we were going to talk a bit about site speed, kind of like what is it that makes sites slow? What can you do about it? How can you measure site speed stuff? And then what are some specific steps you can use to speed things up on your own? Or yeah. So I am going to, I guess I'll just get kind of started. Since everybody's got mics, I'm going to ask that, like right now, I've muted everybody, but I'd like to unmute you so that you can ask questions. So I'm going to unmute you and then ask that you just kind of mute your microphones or be cognizant of the background noise. And then if you've got questions, feel free to chat, put them in chat, or you can just shout them out. If it becomes unmanageable, we'll switch. But right now, we've just got 5 people on, so we should be able to do this. So we're kind of unmuted there, I guess. So to start out, does anybody have any big questions right away, or do you want me to just kind of launch into my spiel?
I'm ready for you to go.
All right, Kathy. Well, I will do that then. So I think, first of all, let's talk. And by the way, I am just another dude doing this stuff on the web, and you guys all have experience with this too. So if you have different experiences than I do, or if you guys have used other plugins or stuff like that to work with this, I want to hear your experience too. This is by no means just my stuff. So talking about what makes sites slow. It can be all sorts of stuff. One thing that can make sites slow is poor hosting. And I think we've all sort of encountered that, or at least from the people that I see in the attendee list here. I know I've talked to all of you guys about like slow hosting. And why would a host be slow? It could be something as simple as a server that you're on that's underpowered. You can get really, really cheap VPSs on the net now that have very, very little in the way of resources like memory and processor. So it might be that you just got a wimpy little server and it can't move that fast. It could be that you are hosting with a big host that does kind of commodity hosting. And when I say commodity hosting, I have in my head this picture of hosts that are just jamming people into servers, like jamming more accounts into a server than a server should really be able to power. And we see that quite a bit. I think, there's this thing in the hosting industry called overselling. And the idea is basically, if you have a server that has, say, 100 gigabyte hard drive, and you are selling accounts that are that offer 1 gigabyte of storage, you would imagine that you would only sell 100 of those accounts, right? Because you can only fit 100 gigabytes on that server. But practically speaking, what most what a lot of hosts do, I would say most hosts do, is they do what's called overselling. They bank on the fact that most of their customers are never going to fill up their hosting account. So if they have a server that has 100 gigabytes of storage, rather than just selling 100 accounts on it, they might sell 200 accounts on it because they feel like nobody's going to max out their storage. And if they start to max out their storage, then they address that in other ways, like either coming down on you to have you sort of clear out storage stuff, not use so much space. Sometimes you'll get notices from hosts that say, hey, you're using too many resources in terms of memory or processor or that sort of stuff. So definitely underpowered servers, and then server setups that just cram too many users on the server. There are also some really geeky sort of technical server setups that sometimes I find problematic. Like you'll see at some hosts where they cluster their MySQL database servers, and all the database servers are separate from the actual hosting accounts. And when that happens, where you've got a bunch of servers that just run databases, but your WordPress is on a separate server, you'll notice, like in your WP config file in WordPress, which is where you have your settings for the database and the database username, password, that sort of stuff, you'll notice the database host name, rather than saying localhost, which means on the server that is WordPress is on, it'll say something like box1234 dot GoDaddy's mysqlhost.com or something like that. So I'm getting a decent amount of background noise here, so I've muted you guys, but if you've got questions, use the GoToMeeting control panel chat there, and then I can unmute. Or in fact, Patrick, I'm going to make you an organizer as well. So if you see people that need to be unmuted, you can do that. So I think I've got you on there. You should be able to unmute people as well. So raise your virtual hand if you got a question. All right. So we talked about hosting, slow, latency. Like, another thing that can make a difference is if you're hosting and you're hosting a site that's aimed at Americans, and your server is in Australia, or it's in Malaysia, or it's in the UK. There's a larger physical distance between you and the server, and we're talking about transmitting data, so it's really quick. But the difference between getting a ping in 100 milliseconds and 400 milliseconds is measurable, and over time that equates to slower speeds. So and there's some things that you can do about that. And then another thing that is that can be a very serious problem is just overloading your site with too much code, right? So we see this even on the front end of websites, where people say, like looking at this page, hey, this page is kind of cool, but it would be really great if all these boxes flew in from the side of the screen and then twirled around, and that we had a transition for this when you hover over pictures, that it rotates to a different picture. And sites that use a lot of complex CSS stuff or JavaScript, that can slow stuff down within the browser. And I saw a really interesting video on WordPress.tv by Zach Tolman on performance. I'll find it here before we're done, and I'll put the link in the room here. But he was saying that in measurement, it looks like 80% of site speed issues really take place within the browser rather than on the server. Like, we tend to talk about, hey, servers are really slow and you need caching and you need this and that. But in actuality, nowadays, a lot of site speed issues are really generated within the browser because there's too much JavaScript, or things aren't loading in a way that starts painting the page on the screen before quickly enough, like it's loading a whole bunch of JavaScript that's blocking the rendering of the page on the screen. So I thought that was really interesting, and I will find that link and I will send it to you. I tweeted about it the other day, I think, but really great. It was actually from WordCamp Seattle this year, Zach Tolman on performance. So I'll find that for you. So tons of WordPress plugins. We see this a lot, where we take over management of a WordPress site, or someone's moving their hosting over to us, and then we kind of take a look at what they've got installed in the way of plugins, and they've got 60 plugins installed and 58 of them are active, and they've got, you know, a whole bunch of themes. Well, technically speaking, having 20 themes installed really isn't going to slow down your site, right? You can only have one theme active at a time, but like we talked about last time, having 20 themes on your site, it means you have 20 times the theme vectors for security vulnerabilities, meaning that, you know, there's a lot of code on the site that you're backing up in your backups, and there's a lot of code on the site that could potentially be hacked if it were vulnerable. And I've actually seen this happen on an account where we had a site hacked a couple years ago, and in combing server logs, we found that they had exploited a non-active theme to sort of get in and then wreak havoc. So I'm a big fan of keeping plugins and themes to a minimum. Themes just for housekeeping's sake, because you can only really use one. So I tend to like to use the theme I'm using and then have a fallback like 2012 or some default theme that I trust in case of troubleshooting. And then for plugins, if I'm not using the plugin, I tend to get it off the site. And then I'm going to show you another way that you can kind of measure the impact that individual plugins have on you. So yeah, slow hosting environments, tons of code on the site, too much front-end bling on your website can kind of cause some issues. So anybody have any questions so far? Going once. Anything? All right. So then I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about measuring site speed. And like I said, just put a little chat in the GoToMeeting control panel, or if you've got a question, and maybe Patrick, you can help me watch out for those, and we can unmute people if we need. So there are a couple tools that I like to use to measure site speed. One I'm really fond, so sort of one of the things that you have to know about is webpagetest.org. So webpagetest.org. This is kind of a cornerstone of web performance usability testing. And another one that I personally like a lot too is Pingdom. We use Pingdom for monitoring our servers, and they've got, if you come to pingdom.com and scroll down to the bottom, they've got this Pingdom tools page. And the thing I like about this is it just looks pretty, and they give you good information. So if we were to go, let's take a look at we'll just see what GoDaddy's got going on. I haven't really looked at this. So when you do these tests, by the way, there's a little slider here. You can sort of drop this down to generate the test from one of 4 locations: Amsterdam, Dallas, or New York. And then you can choose whether or not to save the test and make it public. So what I did here is I loaded GoDaddy's homepage, and you'll see Pingdom gives it a little score. It gives it a performance grade, which I'll be jiggered if I could figure out what algorithm they use to calculate this. They're giving it an 83 out of 100, but saying that it's faster than 65% of all tested websites. Requests, this shows you the number of individual files that are requested to build that page. So, and if we were to look down further in this page, you see what those files are. So there is the HTML file that constitutes the home page. There was actually a redirect to the .nl version because we're testing from Amsterdam. Then there's their global CSS file. There's another CSS file for their Netherlands homepage, and several CSS, JavaScript, JavaScript, JavaScript. So each one of these counts as one request. And sort of one of the cornerstones of beefing up performance is fewer requests is better. So if you have a site where, say, the total page size here, like in this case, GoDaddy's homepage is 581 kilobytes. So, roughly half a megabyte. So if you have a site that has 61 requests totaling half a megabyte versus a site that has 122 requests totaling half a megabyte, the site with 61 requests is going to perform faster. And that really comes down to what happens with requesting each one of these files. There's a handshake that goes on with the server, so that As this page is built, each one of these 61 things is requested from the server that it resides on, and then that server has to say, oh, I got that request, I'm going to send over that file. It sends over the file, verifies that it sent the file. So there's almost like a handshake that happens for every single one of these files. So this is sort of a tenet, is try and drop the number of requests. If you have a whole bunch of CSS files, is there a way you can combine those? Or if you have a bunch of JavaScript files, is there a way you can combine those? Because it's going to be faster to load one 100K JavaScript file than it is going to be to load 10K JavaScript files. And the other thing is JavaScript and CSS is going to be cached within your browser. It's going to be saved on the client's computer within their browser, so it doesn't have to be downloaded again. So if you download that one big file once, it may take a bit on the home page, but it's going to make it faster on the successive pages. So Pingdom, so that's that. Load time shows you it took 2.28 seconds to build that home page, and page size, this is the overall megabytes or kilobytes that home page weighs. It's how big that home page is. So interestingly, I would say, I've heard, and I don't know this to be true, I haven't checked it recently, but I think the rough average around the net for page size is something like 2 megabytes per page, which is an average, but it's, if you take into account the fact that mobile is so prevalent now, 2 megabytes is big. I think, we would really aim to get all pages below 1 megabyte if we can. And on the IvyCat site, I'm trying to keep them, under 500K if I can, which can be tough if you're using external, like type, or if you have a lot of CSS or other things, a lot of imagery, it gets really, really hard. But I was telling the crew, I was looking at a site a couple weeks ago for this radio guy, and I think when I initially, or no, it wasn't a radio guy, it was this other lady who does sort of a staffing kind of site. Her homepage initially weighed like 22 megabytes. And that is like ridiculous. That's, that is nothing you ever want to put on one of your customers, because even if you're on a super fast connection, even if you've got Comcast or Fios or something like that, it may seem fast to you on your machine, but your brother who's checking it on his iPhone is about to kill himself. So anyway, bad joke. Anyway, so another thing Pingdom shows you is what we call the waterfall. And so this is a list in order of load of what happens. These are the requests done to load this page, is what it says here. So we requested www.godaddy.com, and because this test was done in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, it redirected us to nl.godaddy.com. And then once it loaded the HTML for that page, which was 23.4 kilobytes, then it started loading this CSS file, and then this CSS file, then this CSS file in JavaScript, and all the way down. And we don't have to go through what all of these do, but you see here's some images. There's a whole bunch of images. There's some script tags, all sorts of stuff going on there. And you'll see that each of these bars is sort of color-coded. And what these colors mean, if you hover over, you see, I don't know if you guys can make this out on the screencast, but the first item in pink says DNS. So that is the time it takes for to look up what IP address belongs to the domain name requested. So in this case, someone typed in www.godaddy.com. That was yours truly, and it took 50 milliseconds for the website to get a translation of GoDaddy.com to do a DNS lookup to figure out, hey, GoDaddy.com is at this IP address. So the DNS lookup took 50 milliseconds. And then there was a connect time of 54 milliseconds, which is really the time it takes to establish a connection between your browser and the server. And then it waited 189 milliseconds to get some data back. And that totaled 293 milliseconds. So, a little over a quarter of a second. And then from there, it goes down, it had redirected to nl.godaddy.com. And then you see there was an SSL. So this is making a secure connection, took 17 milliseconds, then 27 milliseconds to connect. And then it waited almost half a second this 593 milliseconds, which is the yellow, and then it took 10 milliseconds to receive some data back, and then it goes on. So this is really good information. You sort of get the idea that over here on the left is where the request is made. It does what it needs to do to sort of negotiate with the server. It waits to get the stuff back. It gets the stuff back, and it moves on. So when you see things, so that's great information. And you can see there's sort of a scale up here at the top. This is 0 seconds, and this is 1 second right here. So we're seeing, 1 second. We start to see 1 second when we're, downloading JavaScript a little bit. So one other thing here is, like, here's an image that's loading, but you see here it took almost half a second to make that SSL connection, and then it took 731 milliseconds to connect to the server, sent something in a millisecond, and then waited 194 milliseconds to get something back. So here, this is taking roughly half a second to make a secure connection, or to negotiate SSL, and then more time for a connection there. So I'm going to kind of move on from this, but basically the idea here is you can see in order what's loading on the site and how long it's taking. And the first thing I do when I'm testing stuff and looking at the waterfall here is look for things that are taking a long time to load and try and figure out why they're taking a long time to load. Another thing that's kind of neat about Pingdom here is you can switch the sort. So if you want to sort by file size, you can do that, and then you start to see the items that weigh the most, like have the largest file size, and that can be helpful when you're testing customer sites. We had a customer site recently I was working on where I did this test and sorted by size, and like the first 5 or 6 images, the first 5 or 6 biggest files were images that were all over 100K and significantly over 100K. So it turned out that with all of those images combined, they were getting close to 2 megabytes worth of files just for the images that were shown on the site. So that's where you have to have a really good conversation about the importance of those images and how crisp and clear do they really need to be? Do they need to be accessible on mobile? That kind of stuff. So you can sort by file size, file type, URL, that kind of stuff. It also gives you a performance grade. So this is some more actionable stuff. We got a slider that goes red to green. You want to be more toward the green. So and then it gives you rows that represent different tips, like combine external JavaScript. We're getting a grade of 9 out of 100 on that. And the reason for that is that if we look at this little waterfall here, we see a lot of JavaScript loading. In fact, if we sort by file type and go down here a little bit, we've got JavaScript starting up in here. So this is JavaScript all the way. These are all JavaScript things being loaded down. Good Lord, that's a lot of JavaScript. And I clicked past it there, but so there's a lot of JavaScript. So what they're saying is combine that stuff. Instead of serving up 20 JavaScript files, can you serve up one minified JavaScript file? Minimizing redirects. So redirects is if you type in IvyCat.com in your browser and hit enter, there's a redirect that happens because our website is technically www.ivycat.com. So there's a little bit of time that's taken for the server to say, oh, you're looking for IvyCat.com, you need to go to www.ivycat.com. And you want to minimize that kind of stuff. Leveraging browser caching. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but really the idea with browser caching is that when I visit a page like this Pingdom page, there's all sorts of stuff on here that my browser can cache or it can hold on to for later use. So for example, here's an image. It's a logo with their little tagline thing, or there's a logo. There's probably some images or a font used to create some of these images up in these tabs. There's some other little images used around the site for shading or stuff like that. There's the CSS files. There's JavaScript files. All of these are static files that are downloaded to the user's computer and cached within or can be cached within their browser when you load the page. So when we talk about browser caching, we're really trying to encourage those browsers to hold on to those pieces of data, whether they're images or JavaScript or CSS, for as long as it makes sense. Combining external JavaScript, you can probably guess what that means by or the CSS, combining external CSS is just the same as combining external JavaScript. Rather than serving up a bunch of CSS files, serve up one or two, as few as possible. Removing query strings from static resources. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but we'll talk. I'll give you a different illustration of that. Minimizing DNS lookups. So DNS lookups are the translations of domain name to IP address on the net. So if we had a website where all of our assets, all of our images and all that sort of stuff is kept within our website and we're referencing them all the same way. So when we load an image, it's www.ivycat.com/image/image name, that sort of thing. Then all of those things are on the same domain. So when we would load that page, initially, say the IvyCat homepage, there would be a DNS lookup at the beginning to figure out what IP address ivycat.com is on. And then once that DNS lookup is done, all of the rest of the stuff on the same domain doesn't need to be looked up again. The server already knows where to look for ivycat.com stuff. So what you see, though, on some sites is if you use like a content delivery network, like say, which we do on IvyCat, if we used a content delivery network and we had a subdomain like cdn.ivycat.com, then when we load the homepage, any items that have assets that are on that domain, CDN, that's another DNS lookup. And if we had items that were on WordPress.com or were on other domains, each one of those can be a DNS lookup. So you want to kind of minimize those. And then there's some other stuff here. I'm going to kind of skip over that. Page analysis, this is kind of a neat little overview that shows you how many things were successful. We had 61 requests, 57 of those were successful, 4 of them redirected. It'll tell you if there's any errors, how much time was spent receiving versus connecting and waiting, and SSL, that's good information. This is kind of interesting. Over half of the time was spent loading JavaScript, and then 41% of the time was loading images. So that's kind of crazy because that means the content of your site, the HTML, and the CSS, and plain text stuff, that's less than 10% of the load time. And that's really the guts of the site, right? I mean, the other stuff is necessary too, but, and then time spent per domain here. They've got several different domains. There's gui.godaddy.com, image.godaddy.com, sales.liveperson, godaddy.sp1.convertro.com. So each one of those takes a little bit of a DNS lookup. Total size, that's kind of interesting to see. So that's kind of helpful stuff to see when you're testing. And then history, if you continue to test using Pingdom and you keep your tests public, like in their little settings up here, if you make your test public, they record that and they'll show you the changes over time, which is kind of neat to see. So that is one tool, and then I'm going to show you this other tool, Web Page Test, and let's do the same. I'm not picking on GoDaddy here. I just was trying to think of a domain that wasn't my own. All right. So Web Page Test does basically the same sort of thing. It puts you in a little queue and it runs the site through a series of tests, and then you can view those tests in different ways. I think a lot of optimization experts consider webpagetest.org sort of the authoritative place to go for page speed testing. Interestingly, you can also, you guys probably know this, but within browsers, there's testing capability. So like right now, I'm on Firefox here, and I use Firebug, and you can do some browser speed testing stuff within Firebug. Or on Google Chrome DevTools, you can do the same sort of thing. So here's my page load for GoDaddy on Web Page Test, and it shows the load time for the first view of the page took 5.12 seconds. They got the first byte in at 0.8 seconds, started rendering the page at basically 1.5 seconds. There were 1,350 DOM elements, which are elements in the document object model. It's kind of interesting. How many total requests there were when the document was complete, when it was fully loaded. So document was complete at 5.12 seconds, fully loaded at 11.24 seconds. There were apparently some straggler things. Let's see. So, and it gives you that same waterfall view that we saw over at Pingdom. Again, you've got seconds up at the top, so this is half a second all the way on up, and it sort of shows a demarcation line when your content's all downloaded. And then you can see what are the things that are taking a while here. Same sort of thing. I think Pingdom's representation of this is a little prettier, but this definitely gives you a lot of information. And then you can really see details on each request. So, here is a CSS file that was requested. It was started downloading at 0.829 seconds. And I guess that was a redirect here. I guess that may be one of the ones that redirected. So you can kind of dig in and get more information about them. If there's an error code, it'll show it to you over here. And let's see here, request headers. So this shows the headers that were requested. There's also performance review. There's all sorts of stuff you can dig into here. And actually, I'm not doing we probably don't have enough time for me to go into a lot of it, but it again gives you, here's a page speed score. It's giving you some recommendations like minimize redirects, leverage browser caching, which is what we saw elsewhere, sort of a content breakdown. This is again showing JavaScript versus images and fonts and all that kind of stuff. And then let's see here. Content breakdown. Something else I was looking for here. So it gives you this score up at the time. It's giving us an F for the first byte time, which is the time it takes to get the first byte in. Compressing. You can use gzip compression to minimize some types of files. And then caching static content, which is really stuff that is static, like a CSS file or a JavaScript file or an image. You can cache that stuff. So I could show you more about this. I'm honestly not the best with webpagetest.org. I've used Pingdom more often, but there's a ton of great information in here, and I would really encourage you guys to kind of just mess around with it, and feel free to shoot me questions. So those are two things that I use for testing. Another one that I want to show you that's really specific to WordPress and to the problem of too many plugins is called P3. So I've already installed that on this site. This is just a little test bed that I've got here. And the plugin is called P3, Plugin Performance Profiler, written by GoDaddy, interestingly. And the idea is that it allows you to do a little profile of your site and see what plugins are slowing things down. This is not a plugin that you want to keep running on your site. You want to put it on there, you want to do a diagnostic, see what it has to say, take some action, and deactivate it. So I've already put it in here, but we're going to do a little scan. You see I've got a whole bunch of plugins in this test site. And so I can do a little start scan here, and I'm going to do an auto scan. And you'll see it sort of in this little window. If you can see it, it sort of goes through some different pages on the site and sort of just crawls some different areas of the site to make a profile of how the plugins are affecting load time. And when it's done, we can take a look at that and see if we can make some decisions based on it. All right, so scanning's complete. We can click View Results here. And it's got several tabs. First of all, we see up at the top, there's 17 active plugins. Plugin load time, it's taking 0.09 seconds per visit. Plugin impact, so the plugins are accounting for almost 43% of page load time. So that's a significant thing there, right? And then here's the number of MySQL queries per visit. And then down here in this little chart, like you can see, there is a breakdown of what the plugin is in a little pie chart. So here, if we hover over this is Debug Bar, which is a developer tool that I've got in here. And it took 14% of the load. It took 0.0127 seconds to load that. Here's Ajax testimonials. That was 0.0042. There's post and page 0.0029. rewrite rules inspector. Here's other. Here's the P3 plugin itself, took 4%. Akismet took 7%. Debug bar, and then this is the debug bar extender, which is another developer tool that's got a whole bunch of stuff in it. So, and I've got these things active because this is my test bed and I want to be able to have this debug stuff. But so suffice it to say that you probably don't want to be running all this debug stuff on a production site, right? Because we can see that it's taken up a decent amount of juice here on the site. Then we can see a detailed breakdown. Site load time is kind of up here, and then you can see in kind of bar graph what different things are taking. So WordPress took 0.0957 seconds to load for core, then the theme, P3, Akismet. So this gives you a great visual overview. And I said this the other night at the South Sound WordPress meetup, but I put this on the IvyCat site last year or a year and a half ago or something. I had put in a plugin called OIO Publisher. And I thought, oh, this is great. With OIO Publisher, when we're looking at the blog, I can have these nice little ads over here on the side that show, links over to Sakuri or to Cloudflare or to, other things that we like and may get a little revenue from. So it was kind of an issue of geek fascination. But what actually happened was it really slowed down the site. And when I put in P3 and I ran it, I could see that one plugin was accounting for, over 50% of the site load time. So that made the decision to remove it very easy for me. Here's a simple timeline that's showing WP Core load versus theme and plugin load times. A more detailed timeline of queries, and then there's some more advanced metric stuff. But really, I think, what most people can benefit from is just getting an idea. Like, most people have no idea which plugins are heavyweight on their site or not. You see that there are some hosts such as WP Engine where they blacklist certain plugins, and they often do that because of the load that a plugin creates. Like, I think last time I looked, and I don't know that this is the case now, they had plugins like Google's XML sitemap generator on there, or broken link checker, or some of these things that can cause a lot of load on a big site. So I'd say if you're interested, try putting this in, activate it, run it for a few minutes, and see what you get. It can really kind of give you a little more education on what is causing load on your site. So I'd like to pause and see if anybody's got any questions here. Anybody have questions so far? Holler.
Yes, I have a question.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. On the Pingdom page, I've got a lot of wait time. What causes that?
Oh, that's a good question. It could probably be for several reasons. I mean, it could be from slow server. Mm-hmm. It could be, like, one of the ways that we'll talk about speeding things up is caching. And so, by doing caching in the user's browser, by encouraging the user's browser to cache things, it doesn't have to re-request those things each time, which can cut down on wait time. But yeah, usually I would say either network connectivity issues or slow server stuff. That could cause wait time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any way to find out if my server is what's causing the problem as opposed to anything else?
Yeah, there are probably some, we could probably run some tests on several sites, and if you're seeing the same types of wait time, it would be something where I'd be inclined to go back to your host and just mention it, to their support and see if they have recommendations or if there's something to look into. It's definitely something I would look into if our customers came back and said, hey, everything's taking super long to download. What's going on?
Yeah.
Also, one thing that can happen, Kathy, is when servers get overloaded, they can have something called, like, they can be put in a wait mode, kind of like IO wait, where they've got so much data coming in or out, or they're working so hard that they actually end up waiting to write things to the disk. And when that
Oh,
happens, it's like a huge bottleneck, and things can really slow
sure.
up. So when you've got a server that's overloaded, you get high wait times. Um, and,
Okay.
and sometimes you can help that by caching and some stuff on your end, but sometimes if you've done all you can with respect to speeding things up, it's time to look at different hosting.
Yeah. Is that the same thing that could be true in? I also have a low score on first byte time.
It could be, yeah, it could be. That could have to do with network connectivity, distance from the
Okay.
server. It could server performance, and also the server build. Like for example, at IvyCat we have several dedicated servers. We also have a VPS that's smaller, which is what we run IvyCat on currently. And the VPS just can't perform anywhere near as fast as the dedicated servers. We've got like 16 gigs of memory and 16 processors in the dedicated servers, and the VPS just doesn't have anywhere near those resources, so it just can't respond as quickly. It's kind of
Okay.
like me running a race versus Jackie Joyner Kersee or something, and there's just no contest.
And my last question is, you mentioned Google's XML sitemap plugin.
Yeah.
Can that be deactivated after it's been created until you change something, and then you might want to do it again? But
Oh, that's
can
a
I
good
turn that
question.
off?
I That's a good question, and honestly, I don't know the answer to it entirely. I would say
Okay.
no, because I think that it generates those sitemaps kind of on the fly. But
Ah,
I don't know,
okay.
like, I don't know if you deactivate it, if it wipes out your sitemap. I'll tell you what we do at IvyCat is we tend to use the sitemap component of Yoast's WordPress SEO plugin. So if you're using
Oh,
WordPress SEO for
yeah, I am.
SEO stuff, he's got XML sitemaps built in there, and I really like his implementation. It's low load on the server. It sort of splits your XML sitemap into subcomponents, so you end up with your main XML sitemap that's got submaps for posts, one for pages, one for categories or whatever else you're allowing search engines to index on your site.
That's a great idea. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, since we're man, these things go so fast. I talk so much, don't I? Um, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute again, and I'm going to talk a little bit about speeding up, and then again, holler if you guys have any questions. So one thing you can do to speed up your site is get a better host. And I know I've already said that, but if you are on cheap shared hosting, if you're paying $3 to $5 a month for your hosting, you're on a cheap host. And if you're getting great performance out of it, God bless you. That's lovely. But usually you kind of get what you pay for. And like I said the other night at our WordPress meetup, you see in the hosting space this weird thing happening where people who were used to paying next to nothing for hosting are now paying $30 a month for WP Engine, or they're paying more for a VPS or something like that, because they've decided that the performance of their site is really more important than saving a few bucks a month. So, so you see, WP Engine, Flywheel, Pagely, SiteGround, these kind of places that are either WordPress specific, or they've got offerings for WordPress that are really, really tuned for speed. So better hosting is a great thing. Housekeeping, you run something like the performance profiler on here and realize you've got one plugin that's taken up 43% of your load. Get rid of the plugin, and then also I like to encourage people to be really pragmatic about what they keep. I I love to see people engaged with WordPress, and I love to see the enthusiasm when we launch a site for somebody and we show them how to use it, and you come back and you see that they've installed a few plugins or that sort of stuff. I like to see people engaged with that, but I also you kind of have to temper that a little bit. We had a client a few years ago who I checked in on her site, and my word, she had over the weekend installed like 30 different themes and had tried them out. And then she had tried a whole bunch of plugins. Some of them were still active, some weren't active. So good housekeeping. You know, if you're not using something on the site, get it out of there. Because not only could it be causing a little extra load, you know, deactivated plugins shouldn't be causing extra load. But if you've got plugins in there that are active that you don't need, deactivate them and then remove them from the site. Because that's also less code that could be potentially exploited. So it helps with security too. Another thing is caching. So caching, you know, there's a bunch of caching plugins for WordPress, and there's several different ways to approach this. One of the things I really like is I'm a big proponent of Cloudflare. So why did I say I was going to upload this? I'm not going to upload it. So Cloudflare is a web service that, in fact, let's just do cache and see what comes up here. So WP Super Cache is actually put out by Automatic. It's been around for a long time, and that's a decent caching plugin. I like W3 Total Cache. There are others. Here's Fastest Cache. There's some plugins. Quick Cache is another one. What I like about W3 Total Cache is that it does plug into several other services. Some people think, oh my gosh, this is really bloated. There's way too much in it. And yeah, there's a lot of features in it, but it can also handle a lot of stuff for you. So when you enable W3 Total Cache, you get this little performance icon and menu item over here. And then they'll put up this little annoying message that says you can try their edge mode or whatever. So I'll hide that message. So I want to show you really a few of the quickest things you can do to speed stuff up on your site if you use Total Cache, and also what some of the ramifications of it are. So the dashboard really just gives you kind of an overview of, you know, how to tweet about them. They offer some premium services, so if you want them to configure it, you know, you can order that stuff from within here. You can plug in a New Relic account for server monitoring, a Mac CDN account as a CDN or a content delivery network. You can tie in a Google page speed thing. So that you can get some real-time measurements of page load speeds on your site. So general settings, this is really where you set the overall settings for the whole site, as you could probably tell by the word general. And there's several things that you can do. So first of all, you can toggle all the caching on or off at once. You can put the site in preview mode where as you make changes to the caching, it's actually in a preview mode where you can kind of see it and test it before you deploy it. And that can be helpful. Two of the things that most people on shared hosting can benefit most from, one is page caching. So page caching, you enable it. Usually you only have a few options down here unless you're on a dedicated server or VPS. Disk enhanced is the best. So do that and save that. So what is page caching? What page caching does is, I guess I need to save again here. Maybe it won't save because I'm on a test bed. I can show it to you on IvyCat actually, or on another site. But the idea with page caching is that basically when someone comes to this page on IvyCat and they request it for the first time, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, right? We've already established that if we do a speed test, there are a whole bunch of different elements. There's 55 requests on this page that we loaded, the GoDaddy page, 55 different things loading. And because WordPress is a dynamic database-driven website application, there's a lot of dynamic stuff that happens when you load a page. It's not just, hey, pull in the CSS and pull in the JavaScript. If you are a WordPress theme developer, you're probably using like template tags and things like that to do fun stuff like list categories or, display images, or there's all sorts of stuff that can be done. And all that stuff takes server resources. So when you use page caching, what you're doing is you are taking those pages as they're built and saving a copy of them into a quick reference file, so to speak. So that means when I come to this page the first time, or when I first published this page and it got a visit, WordPress built this page and it saved a copy of it in the W3 Total Cache, so that when Patrick comes along a few minutes later or an hour later and says, I want to read that article about Cloudflare and Sucuri, and he requests this URL. Instead of WordPress building this page from scratch again, it just says, oh, you know what? We built one of these and we've got it over here in the cache, and it pulls that page out of the cache. The net effect is the server doesn't have to work very hard, right? It's got a pre-built page served up to the end user. So that's what page caching is. And then the other thing I want to talk to you about right away is browser caching. And this is something I brought up already today, which is browser caching is reducing server load and making things faster by putting more of the site's assets into the visitor's web browser and caching it there. So that is to say, if I were to come to this home page, or this page rather, and I load this page from a search engine link or something, I link over here, I get this logo loads, that can be cached. The CSS that's used to style this page can be cached. There's maybe some other images in here that are cached, so that if those same assets are used on the next page that I go to, like if I were to click over to web hosting, say, some of these assets are used already, so it doesn't have to re-download that image. The net effect is it's a lot quicker to switch in between. So because they're being cached from the browser, it doesn't have to go out to the internet and get them. It's getting them from right here and serving up things it already knows about. So that's what browser caching is. And so if you do nothing else on your site to help performance, put in page caching and put in browser caching. And each of those things has more information here. So like within page caching, we can go see more settings here. So you can decide whether you want to cache posts page or cache the front page. You can cache feeds, which is a decent idea. Whether or not you want to cache secure requests or not, or cache URIs with query string variables. So what that means is if somebody, like here, I don't know if you guys can see this, but this URL here is wp-testbed/wp-admin/admin.php ? Page equals w3tc underscore pgcache. So a query string is this part right here. The ? Page equals w3 total cache page cache. So most people do not cache stuff with query strings because they're meant to change. So we see this oftentimes in themes or plugins where they include a CSS file and they add a query string on the end of it to show the version of that CSS file. And they do that so that if it gets an upgrade and that CSS file were cached, if the plugin gets an upgrade and there's new CSS, rather than just giving it the same CSS file name, they add that query string on the end of it so that the browser will see it as a different CSS file and re-request it and reload it from the server. Otherwise, you could end up in a situation where the visitor has a CSS file cached in their browser and you're serving one up on the server that has exactly the same name, and their browser says, oh, I don't need to download that, I've already got it, but there's differences. So that's how the query string helps with cache busting, or making sure that you bust the cache and so that you re-download the right stuff. So there's some other settings here for caching. You can choose cache preload, automatically prime the page cache. And in this case, what you're doing, if you turn this on, you point it out to your site, your XML sitemap on the site, which again, we use WordPress SEO for that. And it'll put a link to you put a link to the sitemap for WordPress SEO's XML sitemap on there, and it will camp out on that sitemap. It'll check in on it every once in a while and use that to help build the XML sitemap.
Mm-hmm. All right, can we interrupt for a question from Linda?
Yes.
Sure, go ahead, Linda.
Hi, I just wondered how doing this stuff will affect your report on Pingdom. Will you be able to see the result?
The answer is yes and no. And the no part is because I'm using this on a test bed on my local machine here. I can't do a Pingdom
no, I mean for personally, if I do this to my site, will it then get better results on Pingdom too?
It should, yeah. So the way I approach that almost all the time, Linda, is I will take and pull up Pingdom in a tab, and I'll sort of open that up, and then I'll have my caching settings over here, and I will make some changes, and then I'll test it. And then I'll make some changes and I'll test it again. And what's weird about this, and I always recommend that, by the way, because sometimes there are things that are recommended, like you might try a certain type of caching where counterintuitively it just slows things down for you. So I would always say, if you're messing with page speed stuff by using total cache or super cache or anything, always have webpagetest.org or pingdom or something like that that you can use to test on a continual basis until you're happy. Because yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? All righty. So let's see. Well, then I'm gonna show you a few other things that W3 Total Cache can do here. So browser caching, the settings here, I think are pretty. So with browser caching, there's some types of headers that you can set within the files as they're downloaded to the browser that help the browser and the server determine whether or not you have the latest version. So a last modified header basically is like a little note in the header of the file that says, hey, this was last modified on blah, blah, blah. And so that's a way that you can tell if you've got a newer version of that file in the cache that needs to replace it. So what I would tell you not to do is just go down and check all of these boxes. It's not really going to hurt anything that much, but you don't need all of them. There's some duplicate functionality here. What I would tend to do is set like an expires header and a cache control header. But actually, before you listen to me about that, go look up Google Developer Tools and look up caching, or Google, go onto Google's Webmaster Tools and look up caching, because they've got some different recommendations. And it's a good idea to understand a little bit about the differences between these different tags, because they operate differently, and you probably don't need them all. This thing, enable HTTP gzip compression, check that box. That is like a huge, and that is a one check mark that you can make that will make a huge difference. And basically what that means is gzip compression means that the server will compress and zip up files before they send them to you. And it's going to do this mostly for text-based files like HTML, plain text, PHP, that kind of stuff. It zips them up before it sends them to you, and it has huge gains in file size. So if you've got a 10K file that's a text file, once it goes through gzip and gets sent to your browser, it may be 1K or 2K. So that's a really easy thing that you can do. If you check this box that says prevent caching of objects after a setting change, W3 Total Cache will add a query string to stuff. So I don't encourage that unless you know what you're doing. And there's some other settings here too. But browser caching, again, is forcing the end user to cache as much stuff as possible in their browser, or as much stuff as makes sense. There are other things here, and we've basically run out of time, but there's some other things in W3 Total Cache that can be really helpful. Minification is the practice of taking a big CSS file or JavaScript file and removing all of the white space from it and sort of compressing it into its smallest incarnation. So that's minifying. And then there's also concatenation. Or combination. And so that's another thing this can help you with, is not just minifying individual files, but if you have 10 JavaScript files, can you have it combine those files together and then possibly minify them, so that you can combine and minify both JavaScript and CSS. And then there's other types of caching like database caching, object caching, which are a little more advanced, usually used on like a VPS or a dedicated server. And then there's the CDN. So CDN is a content delivery network. This is a way to have another network that has a lot of power serve up your static images and files for you. So like, for example, Cloudflare is a CDN, and you can plug that in here. You can also use like Max CDN. I think there's several other, there's all sorts of them that you can use, but Max CDN is an easy one, and they'll even give you a 25% discount if you sign up through here. Cloudflare's is free as long as you don't need SSL. Well, actually, you can get free SSL for them, but Cloudflare CDN is free, and I highly recommend it. It adds an added level of security too. So, So, gosh, I bite off more than I can chew with these sessions. I feel like I just sort of ran over the top of all this kind of stuff. Hopefully, it gave you guys some good information, and I'll unmute everybody. So, if you guys have questions, feel free to shout them out, and I'll stick around for a bit.
Well, that was great, Eric. Thank you very much.
You're
I
quite
have
welcome.
one thing I just found out when I was going through my W3 total cache.
Mm-hmm.
I minimized and combined my JavaScript, and my slider on my front page stopped working.
Yep.
So if you do that, you'll have to add an exclusion for that JavaScript from your slider.
Yeah, that's a really good.
Something I just learned this morning.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's another reason why I think anytime you're messing with this kind of stuff, whether it's just caching or you're working with minification or concatenation, that kind of stuff, it's always good to test. And not just test using Pingdom or web page test, but actually click around your site and have a browser that you're okay with dumping its entire cache, like clearing your browser cache so that you can click around the site as if it were fresh. Because I've seen that stuff happen a lot. And your illustration of a slider is a perfect illustration. Because I had that happen on a site that I was working on yesterday, actually, where they have a slider that's powered by Woo Slider, but if we do certain types of caching or if we cache the home page, it just stops working. So there are ways that you can do exemptions. Even Cloudflare allows you to do that by adding a certain data class to JavaScript files, and it'll sort of bypass compression or bypass certain types of processing. Anybody else have any other questions?
It's a lot to think about. I'll probably have questions next time I see you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what's fun about this stuff, like what I get a kick out of, is when you get a site that you really notice a speed difference, because when you get a site where the homepage is loading in 5 to 7 seconds and you get that down to a second or two, it makes a huge difference for your end users, and it just feels, I don't know, you just swell with nerd pride. Like, look what I did. So, well, thank you so much, folks, for attending, and I hope it was helpful. We'll make a little, we'll process this little video and we'll post it to the blog so that you can check it out later if you want to.
Thanks, Eric.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you soon. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.